Hello. I hope y'all are doing well. Just wanted to bring a few thoughts from His Life devotional. This week is focused on Jesus as the great I am. And we'll be kind of following this idea that leads to Jesus' famous utterance in John 8, verse 58, where he says, "Before Abraham was, I am." But what does that mean exactly? What does it mean for Jesus to say that I am? To understand that, we kind of have to go back in the Old Testament in the book of Exodus, where it was kind of first brought up. And in Exodus, you have the Israelites who are in Egypt, and they grow rapidly in Egypt. Um, and so the leaders of Egypt kind of deal harshly with them to put them in slavery. And in chapter 2 and verse 23 through 25, you have the people who are groaning and crying out, and it says that God hears those groans, and He remembers the covenant that He had with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And so this story kind of shifts to this guy Moses, who's tending to his flock, and he sees a bush that is burning in the wilderness. So he's intrigued, and he goes in to find out what's going on. And as he approaches the bush, this voice calls out to him, and he tells them that he's going to bring his children out of Egypt, and and he says he's going to do that through Moses. And Moses is kind of like, you have the wrong person. Who am I that I should do this? And he says, don't worry, I will be with you. And so Moses says, okay, but when I go to the people, they're going to ask who this is, and what should I say? And God says, I am who I am. He says, and when you say this to the people of Israel, I am has sent me. And so when God says this, He says, there's this very profound statement. He's saying, I am, or I will be. He says, I am what I am and will continue to be what I am. And he says, so when you go and tell this to the people of Israel, say that the I am has sent you. And this utterance has deep, profound implications, and two of the biggest ones are this reveals His eternal existence, but also His presence. So Him saying this reveals God's existence, as the writer in the devotional states, says that He is the eternal God. He transcends time. Richard Dawkins, in his famous book, The God Delusion, says that he's kind of cracked the case. He says, if you had your creator, then who created your creator? And he thinks he's kind of solved it. And one of my favorite professors, thinkers, is John Lennox. He's a mathematician at Oxford. And in a debate with Richard Dawkins, he said that whole question is flawed, because you're saying that God is existed, or that you're presupposing that God is created. But we don't think that. We believe in a God who isn't created, but is the creator of all things. And science has grown rapidly, made a lot of profound movements, especially recently, and all these movements are just coming to the conclusion that there was a beginning. And John Lennox points that out. He says that he's not scared of the advancements of science, because all these advancements are just coming to prove that there's a beginning, something that Christians have known for a very long time. Because in our Bible, the story of our God starts off with, in the beginning, God. And this is a theme that's kind of played out all throughout the Bible. It shows up a lot in Isaiah, of course, when Jesus comes, but also in the book of Revelation. In Revelation chapter 1, verse 4, Jesus is revealing, has this revelation to John, and when John writes the letter, he says, grace and peace from Him who is, who was, and who is to come. W.B. West, in his book Revelation Through First Century Glasses, has a really good thoughts on this verse. He says, This was especially meaningful for the Christians of the seven churches that they're writing to. On page 27, he says that the people of this time were hearing a lot about how Rome was eternal. Rome was the eternal city. All roads lead to Rome. Other cities are going to fall, but Rome will last forever. And in page 27, he says, "But the Lord assured the Christians of Ephesus, Samaria, and Pergamum and the other seven churches that Jesus Christ was the Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end." So God knew that his people were hearing from all around that all these things are eternal. In this time, the Pharaoh was thought to be eternal. In Rome, the emperor was thought to be eternal. But God wanted his people to know that he is the one that is eternal, the truly eternal. But also this reveals the presence of God. It's interesting in the book of Exodus, the action that spurs God to reveal himself to Moses is because he hears the sufferings of his people. And it's no coincidence that that's when he decides to reveal himself. And this is a common theme of God being there in the midst of suffering. A lot of times we want to experience God on the mountaintops, and we think we're closest to God in those mountaintops experience, but really God shows up time and time again, most profoundly and most significantly in the midst of suffering. When John writes those letters to the seven churches in Revelation, they were in the midst of suffering, and God wants them to know that He has won the battle, and that we serve a God who is eternal. And also in the story of Jesus, John Lennox, he was doing another debate on why pain and suffering exist, and that's a hard question. We don't know why pain and suffering exist, and I don't think we're meant to know. But there's something that John Lennox points out that I thought was really profound. He talks about how Jesus claims to be God, and so Jesus is walking around on the earth claiming to be God, but the heart of the story of Jesus, the climax, reaches the cross. So if Jesus is God, then what is God doing on the cross? And he says that he believes God does not become distant with the problem of suffering, but has himself become part of it. All throughout the story of the Bible, we know that this suffering exists, but you also see a God who is not distant from that suffering. He does not run when he hears the cries of his people, but instead puts himself in the center of those sufferings, in the center of those cries, and bears that with us. And I'm thankful that we have a God who does that, an eternal God who hears the cry of his people and is there in the midst of that suffering. I hope you guys can reflect on that this week, and as we go through this, as Jesus being the I Am, a God who comes to us, especially in our times of need. Hope you guys have a great week. God bless.